Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Welcome, listeners, to a really exciting episode of Extrology. I'm delighted to have as my guest here today, Gareth de la Torre, author of a fantastic book, What the Ruck Just Happened. It's a really page-turning read. It's a fascinating read. And I want to start by introducing Gareth by reading, and we debated this as to what is the bit on the back of a book called. We've determined that the blurb seems to sum it up perfectly.
I think so, yeah.
But I want to start with my introduction of Gareth by reading the blurb on the back of this fabulous book. Gareth once enjoyed a life that seemed almost perfect, a reality he didn't fully appreciate until a freak accident resulted in a severe head injury, leaving him grappling with debilitating epilepsy. This would change his life forever. What followed was a systematic loss of everything he knew: his health, his job, his friends, his marriage, and very nearly his life. In those darkest of times, Gareth found solace in his childhood passion for the outdoors and physical fitness. This deep-rooted love became his guiding light as he battled against depression and the challenges epilepsy imposed on his life. Gareth's journey back to health is the embodiment of courage, perseverance, and triumph of the human spirit. In his own words, Gareth speaks of resilience, determination, and the healing potential found within ourselves when faced with life's greatest adventures. There are tales of adventure, endurance, and monumental comebacks, reminding us that the strength to rise again can be discovered through the pursuits that ignite our souls, even when it appears that all hope is lost. I think that is a wonderful description of everything I've gotten to understand about you, captured in a brilliant book. So,
thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Gareth de la Torre. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Good man, good man. How are you feeling this morning? We're good to go? We're ready
Absolutely.
to jump straight
Brilliant.
in?
Yeah, we've had a wonderful evening in Poole, and it's always nice to come and visit this part of the world as well, and to obviously catch up with yourself. So, all good.
Well, let's dive in. Questions. I think for context, it's always useful to understand the backstory. And I think the discovery of epilepsy, how you found out that you'd gotten epilepsy, I think would be really interesting for readers and listeners, frankly, thinking of the book, to understand. So could you share the moment when first you found out that you'd epilepsy, and what were your initial thoughts and feelings?
Well, I ignored the fact for quite a long time. I'd had this bizarre accident at home, really, banging my head, and then as the days went on, I was just having these like blackouts. I took some time off work, and I was just always one for like, oh, just walk it off, you'll get better, things will get better. And I was gradually getting worse, and eventually I was forced into going to see a doctor, and I'd put that off for probably, I don't know, a month, maybe, of having these blackouts, people saying, I think you should really go and get yourself checked out. And I was like, no, I'll be fine. But I had to get a letter to be able to take my children on holiday, and like a fit to fly letter. So I went and saw a private consultant, and he said, yeah, you're fit to fly because you're not traveling alone, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I'm going to start you on anti-seizure or epilepsy medication, and I need to see you when you come back. And it hadn't even, up until then, crossed my mind.
Nobody had mentioned that might be a possible diagnosis. No,
not at all. And we went away on holiday, and we were just calling them blackouts. They were getting worse and worse and worse. And when we returned, went back to see the consultant again, and I think it was maybe a couple of months after that, after having a battery of tests, that he said, yeah, we've diagnosed you with epilepsy.
The blackouts to which you refer, for the benefit of listeners, what is that? How does it sort of, what's the sensation or the experience? How does it manifest?
I mean, I know now that there's so many different types of epilepsy, and I would or still have what they call drop seizures. So I can only literally describe it as my soul leaves my body and what is left just drops to the floor. And then when I come round, I quite often don't know who I am, where I am, very confused. And, that memory loss can last for anything from a few minutes to a few hours. And it then all starts to come back gradually, but not in any kind of chronological order. The medication I'm on now has made it a lot better, but there are times where, it just happens. It's like a light switch. I don't actually know. I don't get what they would call an aura or anything. It's just, lights go out, and then I kind of, it's like waking up. But I can only describe it like it's a little bit if you've had a big night out on the beer, and you don't remember going to bed, and then you wake up, that kind of confusion of
start trying to almost sort of piece the night together. Where have I been? What have I done?
Yeah.
Who have I upset in my case?
It's a little bit like that, yeah. And anyone that suffers from epilepsy will probably tell you, each time you have one, it's like having one for the first time. It doesn't kind of get easier. Do you see what I mean? I don't think you get used to it. So it's you learn to live with it, but I don't think you ever get used to having it.
So those blackouts to which you refer pre this holiday for this, in effect, it was a seizure. That's what you were having, but you just you weren't aware that's what it was termed at the time.
I was just massively in denial with all of it.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll ignore it and it'll go away. That was my philosophy at the time.
And it was caused, to your point, by a head trauma, a blow to the head.
Yeah,
bang on the head.
Yeah, I fell in my living room and hit my head against the coffee table, knocking myself out, and that triggered it. There is some speculation that when I was 3, I had quite severe meningitis, and I had a seizure then. So the consultant said there's a possibility that you may have had epilepsy all your life, but so mild that you'd never know. It would manifest itself in what you may call daydreaming, where you would just, were you a kid that stared out the window at school, that kind of thing. So that is a theory that I could have always had it.
Goodness. So for the benefit of listeners who perhaps aren't aware or don't understand what epilepsy might be, how do you define it?
Well, epilepsy is a neurological illness, and it's basically like an electrical activity in your brain that then just kind of shuts your body down. But there's various different types of epilepsy. Some people only suffer seizures when they're asleep. Some people have what they call absent seizures, which is like the daydreaming, just staring into space. I think when we talk about epilepsy, everybody imagines the shaking seizures and foaming at the mouth and that. But that I don't tend to do that quite a lot. So I have done, but I don't tend to have those kind of seizures. I tend to just drop wherever I am. So.
And is it fair to assume, therefore, that so every seizure could be different, and it manifests for those that suffer from epilepsy in a variety of differing ways? So it's not like, I don't know, a diagnosis whereby a doctor is able to say to you, right, so this is what's happening, so this is what you would now expect. It's almost that uncertainty of this could manifest in any one of a number of ways.
There's loads of different facets to it, and I don't think we really truly understand all of it. As you come out of a seizure, there's a stage called the postictal stage, which is actually the seizure's finished, but you're just coming out of it. And for a time, I used to go like walkabout, like sleepwalking, not knowing that I was doing it. There's low, and it has this real big knock-on effect because the anti-seizure medication that they give you or try you on, there's so many on the market now, but you tend not to take one. It's trying to work out that combination of 2 or 3 together that will best control your seizures. But then that has a knock-on effect with the side effects. Like I'm quite often, after I take it, sometimes I feel overly tired and quite nauseous sometimes taking it. So that kind of, has that effect as well as the epilepsy. You have to then take this medication to help control your seizures.
And that's for life, right? That's something you're,
Yeah,
I suppose, depending on what advances might be made in research and other treatments that might come along. But as far as we are aware today, that's something that you will take now for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, there are surgical options. If they can find exactly where it starts in your brain, you can have the surgery to have that tiny piece removed, and that can cure your epilepsy, which is quite an intrusive procedure.
Yeah.
With myself, because we can't manage my epilepsy with medication to a level that myself and the consultants would think is acceptable, we're talking about a surgery called VNS, which is vagal nerve stimulation. So it has been shown that if you can stimulate the vagus nerve in your neck electronically, it can help reduce seizures. So they put a wire around the nerve, which is then connected to a battery pack in your chest, like a power pack. And then it repeatedly, for example, stimulates that nerve for 3 seconds every 30 seconds. And that can help. So that's probably the next step for me.
Can you remember the range of emotions, how you felt, if you like, when that doctor sat across from you and said, right, we're going to put you on this medication of epilepsy? Do you remember how that made you feel at that time?
In those situations, I think you remove yourself from what's going on. And this is just happening to someone else. And then my instinct is, well, let's just fix it. Let's fix it. What do I have to do to fix it? That was my initial kind of feeling towards it. And then as we got on and the medication wasn't fixing it, and I started to kind of lose kind of things in my life, that was when it all started. This is real now, and this isn't like a thing that I can fix. This isn't going away, and I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. I'm going to have to rely on other people to fix this for me. So yeah, it was initially it was denial, then it was like, let's fix it, and then I just spiraled into this pit of blackness. That's all I can really describe it as things started to be removed from my life. It was almost a sense of not caring. I don't care I've got epilepsy now because I haven't got anything,
How has living with epilepsy affected your day-to-day life? I mean, what were some of the bigger challenges that you were faced with initially?
Well, it affects everything that you do. I mean, you learn to live with it, but it's always in the back of your mind. I haven't had a bath.
Yeah.
I can have baths, obviously, if someone's with me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that kind of thing, I sit down. I'm
ashamed to say that never would have occurred to me, but it makes perfect sense as to the reasons why you couldn't, as you've explained. But
you sit down in the shower. You sit down to use the toilet. Anything. You learn these little things like to try and mitigate any form of injury that you would have in a fall. I mean, for a period of time, it just seemed that all of my seizures happened when I was on the stairs. I went through a period of time where I was constantly having seizures on the stairs, ending up at the bottom.
And do you think people might think, is there a risk that people might, ill-informed perhaps, but might assume, well, look, if you feel it coming on, get to the bottom of the stairs is not an option, is it?
I don't know that it's going to happen. Some people get like an aura.
Right.
They get like a funny taste in their mouth or that. I mean, my partner says to me, she can tell. And she will say that my personality can change sort of like half an hour to 15 minutes before I have one. But I wouldn't notice that if I was on my own. So it's we use the term epilepsy, but it just covers such a broad, it's like saying cancer. We all know what cancer is, but when you dive deeper and zoom in on it, there's so many different facets and different ways of treating it. And it is a little bit like that.
Do you know, and I should have done the research, shouldn't I? But I'm stuck here. I'm curious as to how many people it affects, whether it's from a UK perspective or internationally, globally. How many people do they believe in? I think it's
about 1 in 100.
Goodness.
Yeah.
That seems high to me.
Yeah, one in
I'm
100.
reflecting on who have I met in my life or come across that I'd heard or knew had been diagnosed with epilepsy.
Yeah.
Goodness, that strikes me as a significant proportion of people. And as you say, they'd be wrestling with it in various forms.
Yeah.
But 1 in 100
It could be
is the
just
number.
like absent seizures or full-on seizures. Their seizures may be controlled by medication. The unfortunate thing is about epilepsy is there's such a stigma attached to it that a lot of people won't actually come forward and say that they've got it.
Right.
If you came across someone lying in the street, he's on drugs or he's drunk or, it's one of those kind of situations. But there is a massive stigma attached to it still, even in this day and age.
This wonderful book, and we're going to come on to talk about much of this, but you very kindly shared it with me. I've read it cover to cover, and there's a lot of talk about it's almost a systematic loss of everything you knew as a consequence, your health, your job, relationships. How did you cope? I mean, profound changes in your life. And how did you cope?
Well, I was just getting married when I was diagnosed. And there's a story in the book. The day before my wedding, I had a seizure on the stairs, was blue lighted into hospital with a suspected spinal injury. That was the day before the wedding, So I was almost embarking on a new life after a divorce. Was getting married, had this bang on the head, and in it, I guess it was gradual, but to me it was just like one hit after the other. So I lost my job was the first thing.
And we've talked about this, and it's you describe it really the trauma of that this sort of loss to which we refer, this trigger of a whole series of events. But again, for the benefit of listeners, the thought of losing your job first and foremost, without all of the things that followed.
Yeah.
But life's good. You perform. You've got a great job, doing really well, traveling. Working in sales, traveling.
Yeah. Nice holidays, nice car.
Yeah, and
everything.
all of a sudden, like that, it changes in an instant. It has a massive effect, which I think I mention it, if only because I doubt people, certainly if they've never or don't know someone that's had to battle with this, wouldn't understand the implications, the wide-ranging implications of how this impacts your life.
Yeah, I had a fantastic job, a job that I really enjoyed, had a nice car, excellent, nice holidays. I kind of living that life that people I think would look at and go,
"He's doing all right.
Yeah,
good for you, mate." Yeah.
I was enjoying life as well. I think that was the thing. And then obviously was diagnosed with epilepsy, got called into the head office, and I'd been off work, legitimately signed off while we were trying to kind of get it under control. So the accident happened in May. And it was the following January that I got called into head office. And they basically said, we've gone through your contract. Because you can't drive, which I can't.
And you're working in sales as well, so you're on the road a fair bit, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's one of the prerequisites of your contract. We're going to let you go. And you just think, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And I remember flying home from Scotland, and because that's where the head office was. And I remember being on the plane going, how does this work now? What do I do? How am I going to pay all the bills and, do all of this and et cetera, et cetera? And I guess I was fortunate in enough that I had some money in the bank from the sale of a home that I had. So I knew I had like a little buffer. So I then had to go down the road of claiming like a disability benefit, which I'd never done any of this. I didn't know about universal credit or personal independence payment or anything like that. I didn't know what you did. What do people do when they're sick and they can't work? I don't know. And so we had to go through that horrendous process of applying to get this benefit and then being assessed by somebody and then waiting for them to come back and say, yes, you do qualify and you can have this money and et cetera. But be under no illusion that it was going to be able to afford me any form of living or lifestyle other than basic survival, really.
I was going to say it would be you're existing, but you're not living life, right?
No, exactly. And it was quite humbling, if I'm being honest, to have that. And so I was like, well, okay, I've got epilepsy. trying to deal with that. And now I've lost my job.
But also, as well, your independence. So people, for the benefit of listeners, but your driving license is removed, and that's indefinitely or permanently. When first diagnosed, how does that play out?
You have to submit your driver's license when you have epilepsy, and then depending on how long you have it for, sometimes you have to be seizure free for a whole year. Sometimes it's 2 years before you can get it back, and then you have to apply to get it back, and they're not necessarily guaranteed that you will. So that's a kind of long drawn out process. But it was just this kind of, you're kind of thrust into this. I knew corporate sales, I knew stress, I knew long days, I knew nice holidays, I knew that's what I knew, socializing with friends, going to rock concerts, that's what I knew. I was now pushed into this other realm of, I don't know any of this. I'm basically, and I was having to rely on people after a seizure. My wife at the time would have to dress me, put my socks on, do all of that. Sometimes, embarrassingly, you wet yourself, so that would all have to be taken care of.
So your dignity is impacted, respectfully, but that is, you're contending with all of these.
Yeah, and I mean, I was in my early to mid 40s.
Yeah,
I wasn't old in my head. I wasn't old. I was, and it just got layer by layer. It was just stripped away. So you lose your health, and then the job, and then so you're stuck at. I was just stuck at home.
And how much of a this phrase that not all disabilities are visible or whatever. You hear that expression sometimes.
Yeah.
So to look at you, Gareth,
exactly,
you're a fine-looking man in a picture of health. You look great. And yet actually you're contending with something which is really debilitating and has had a massive impact on your life that people can't see.
No, that's
I wonder
right.
how that affects, because I think it's a daft analogy to draw, but if you break your leg, you have a cast on.
Yeah.
People go, oh, poor you, what you done?
Yeah.
Oh, that, how long's that going to take to fix? And when you're back on your feet again, and people have, there's an element of almost understanding and sympathy because people can relate to it.
Yeah.
They understand if you break a bone, that's going to hurt, but yet it's going to fix, right? But with this,
it's hidden. Yeah,
it's hidden, and I guess therefore people I'd imagine some people are wonderful and very supportive and very understanding, but equally some people may be cynical or questioning, or because of that lack of understanding.
Well, I'm lucky that I get a disabled person's rail card because I have epilepsy. And when I go to buy my tickets at the thing and you hand it over, I do sometimes think the person that's selling you the ticket looks at you and goes, really? I mean, I might be making a bigger thing out of that, but I do sometimes get that impression because I'm not in a wheelchair. I haven't got another head growing out of mine. It is completely invisible. Mm. And I think it's only those friends and family around you that are close that actually know how debilitating it can be, because you have the seizure and that can last minutes, few minutes, 10 minutes, but it wipes out the rest of the day, sometimes the following day as well. You're just so tired. You have to sleep it off.
And I'd imagine the thing that strikes me as to what you're going through at that time is this word stress. So the impact that stress has. You talked about prior this, doing the job you were doing and the stress that would entail. Undeniably, it's there. This is a more, I might argue, I'm not qualified to suggest a more dangerous type of stress because I don't understand quite what I'm saying when I phrase it that way. But I'd imagine you're contending with, the worry, if you like, of, well, how am I paying the bills? What do I do now? What does the rest of life look like for me? All of these, the practical, you've got to go through this, to your point around the benefits to which you're entitled and understanding that. And I imagine you're just disappearing in your own head with all of this concern, which is then impacting your mental well-being, your physical health as well, because stress can be does horrible things to the human body. That's just really traumatic.
Yeah, I mean,
traumatic
at the time,
series of events.
It doesn't kind of feel like that at the time, but when you're in it, I can only describe it as you're at the center of something and it's just chaos all around you, because there's a lot of the time it's family are looking after you. You're backwards and forwards being ambulanced to hospital. Who's picking who up? Who's taking who to the hospital? How's Gareth getting back from the hospital? Who's looking after Gareth tomorrow? Who's, and all of this is happening around you. And I mean, I mention it in the book. I think I resented eventually having epilepsy, but I think worse than that, I was resenting the people that were looking after me because I didn't want to be looked after. And I think that came out.
I think that's an understandable emotion and place in which to find yourself, given that you've had all of your, you live life, to your point, you're in your early 40s, right? So you've lived the life of an independent family man, all that would entail, that all of a sudden that gets stripped back bare to its rawest bare minimum of, well, now you've got to rely on other people now. Yeah. And actually that strips your soul bare almost. That's like rebuilding 40 years of wiring that says this is what I do and how I think and how I behave and what I provide for my family and all those sorts of good things. Yeah, absolutely. It's all being called into question. You're having to rely on other people in a way that probably historically you didn't have to. I always looked at myself as an alpha male. I travelled, Europe, climbing mountains. I did all of these like manly things, and the people that my friends were all of the same ilk. And then all of a sudden you're being lifted off the floor by your brother and your mum, and you've wet yourself and you're being carried to the sofa, or you wake up and, a paramedic is putting a cannula in your arm and all of these things. It was just like a karate chop through your life. And you find yourself, are you questioning your identity? Is that a fair question, a fair assumption to make? Yeah,
I think you do. I think you question everything, about yourself at the time. And when things like that happen, you then don't recognise who you are anymore because you've kind of changed into somebody else, Or it's a strange kind of sensation and a strange feeling. And I think what happened then was that just prompted this massive decline in my own mental health, which again I wasn't aware that was happening,
Is there, and again I've no evidence to support this, but nonetheless I'm intrigued, is there any evidence, because we're going to come on to talk about the impact that it had on your mental health with all that you were contending with, is there any correlation between something, because certainly I believe that some neurological conditions have a correlation with things like depression, anxiety, those sorts of, there's a correlation that sometimes the impact on the brain can trigger that kind of, switches off the dopamine tap, if you like, and doesn't give you the good stuff you need to retain that balance. Is there any connection with
I've
epilepsy?
Not read any medical journals that say that, but that's not to say that they're not out there. But from my own experience, I would say, I don't think I didn't have any mental health issues prior to having epilepsy. Was it, the bang on the head that prompted this, or was it just the social process of kind of losing everything that then prompted this decline? I don't know.
Your book beautifully and very bravely discusses your, I guess I was going to say, you're deteriorating mental health and sort of and becomes a deep depression and some really dark times which culminate in an attempt to take your own life.
Yeah.
Could you talk about what led you to that point? I mean, I think people, for the benefit of listeners, many of whom I might be assuming, well, they would get it anyway, but given all you've been through, but what led you to that point? And I guess it always, the question that springs to mind was what was going through your mind? What got you to that point where you thought, this is the only way out?
Yeah, I mean, I was on a certain medication that was making me irritable. That was one of the side effects. That was causing problems within my relationship. And when we discussed this with the consultant, the consultant would say to my wife, well, you have to remember it's not him, it's the medication. But that's really difficult to do, isn't it, when someone's in your face shouting at you? Yeah. And so that started to creep in. I was having to rely on everybody to do everything. And then I kind of felt worthless. I became the complete person that I came from that ilk of what do you mean there's something wrong with your mental health? Pull your boots up, stop playing the victim and just get on with it, you know. You're attention seeking. That I was from that ilk. I was Gen X, brought up that way, you know. You fall over and hurt your leg, you walk it off.
Yeah.
That was where I was from. But I found myself that I just couldn't get out of this dark place. I didn't want to leave the house because I had this like overwhelming anxiety. And I put that down to I didn't want to have a seizure in public. So I kind of ripped that off, you know. I was depressed. And I kind of wrote that off as well. I'm not depressed. And then I was left on my own in the house, which at that time was quite a rare occurrence. And
because people were concerned about
me having a seizure, yeah.
Right, okay. But not necessarily the concerns around your mental state at that time.
No. And I had a seizure while I was on my own, and I managed to get myself upstairs and into bed. And I remember just thinking, I can't go on. This is not, I don't want my life to be like this. I don't want my wife to have to be looking after me. I don't want my mum, who was approaching 70, to be running around after me all the time. I didn't want that. I don't, you know, there just seemed to be all this chaos around me constantly all the time. And, you know, I didn't want my two daughters to have a dad that had epilepsy. You know, when they go to school, what does your dad do for a living? Oh, my dad doesn't because he's got epilepsy. I didn't want them to, I didn't want that. I wanted them to go to school and say, my dad works in commercial sales and he drives a Mercedes and he, you know, I just didn't want the life that I had. And because I was in that post-ictal stage of a seizure, I don't think I was thinking like, I can't talk about other people that have tried to take their own lives, but I didn't have to think about it very long. It was an instant decision. And at the time it felt empowering. Oh, this is something that I can do. This will fix everything. I can do this.
You were in control of it. Yeah. You weren't reliant on other people to fulfill. Right.
I'm in control of my destiny now.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna wait and fall down the stairs and break my back and end up in a wheelchair, or I'm not gonna wait for that to happen. I'm gonna sort this out. I'm gonna be a man, and I'm gonna sort this out now. And I did it in an instant. I got up. I took a canvas belt that I had. Threaded through, wrapped it around my neck, tied it to the door handle, and then just laid on it. And I was out really quick. Yeah, it was. When I look back on it now, it wasn't hard. It was I think when people think of, if you watch films where people take their own lives, it's like they have this long drawn out tears, and you know. And I think I was crying, you know, and. They draw it out and then eventually it happens. Yeah, no, it wasn't like that. It was a really quick decision, and I thought it was for the best. Everyone, you know,
you felt you were doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I thought, and then it'll be over. I won't have to suffer anymore. Those around me aren't going to have to look after me anymore, and that'll be perfect. And in my own head, I'd rationalised it. That, why didn't I do this before? You know, well, at the time, I didn't realise that I'd slipped into such a deep depression. I was quite, you know, I was almost excited.
You've got an answer to this huge problem.
In a weird way, yeah. So yeah, and that was that. It was a very quick decision. And the irony now is that what we think happened, and I describe it in the book, is that the stress of doing it caused me to have a seizure which pulled the belt off the door handle. So in an adverse and weird way, epilepsy saved my life.
Yeah.
So yeah.
This incredible trauma you've experienced ultimately is responsible for giving you life back.
Yeah. absolutely. I came round. I was laying in front of the door, and I believe it was my mum and my wife at the time trying to push the door open, and then I only got this sort of from my mum's recollection, was they then reached through to try and push me away, and they realised that there was something around my neck, and then panic, basically, ambulance and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, and I guess once I'd come to my senses and I was, the ambulance people put me on the bed and did all the checks and everything, and then you look at the faces of the people that love you, and then I realised that, oh my God, that was what I thought was going to be a release was not. I could see that it almost aged people. Do you know what I mean? I mean, my wife at the time and my mother were looking after me so well. I didn't realise that, but they were looking after me so well. And then to do this was just like the ultimate betrayal, really. They're there trying to keep you alive, trying to help you, so you can manage your day, so you can do things, and they run you around in their car, take you places and do all this. And then you betray them by doing this. And yeah, and I think I slipped to another level of depression then. I don't think that was the bottom of the pit. No.
There is this, I mean, like I say, the book, you talk about it, incredibly brave. I think you're incredibly brave to sit across from me here and talk about it. I remember once somebody talking to me about suicide, and that's used the phrase something like, it doesn't stop the pain for people that have succeeded in taking their own lives. It doesn't stop the pain, it just passes the pain on.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm quite embarrassed about it. Obviously, I don't want to sit here and talk about it freely. It's something that again, I'm of that generation where you don't talk about your weaknesses, But I think to get the story across, I think you have to understand where you were, the catalyst of how it all happened with the epilepsy, losing your job, trying to take your own life. Things were just rolling downhill, and there didn't seem to be any end of it.
And we've talked about this as well, haven't we? This sense of what people would not necessarily say to you, but that sense that people will say, "Oh, well, you got to, you almost got to hit the bottom before you can bounce back." But there was no bottom, right?
There is no bottom. Yeah,
constantly piling on event after event after event after event.
Yeah,
I think the wonderful thing about this book, and there are many. One of the wonderful things I think is you get to a point in this book where you start to see through your narrative how you're realizing that you're getting to a point where you want to change. You want to be able to regain back some of that control and accept that you've got epilepsy, you've got to contend with it. It's a big issue, but that you want to wrestle back some control for yourself. And you start to, I got that sense, you really start to own it. You really start to own it and take control of it. And that's not, it's not to say that there is a moment where you just go, "Oh, I've got this now. I've sorted it." It again becomes another step, another leg of the journey. And part of that is through this voyage of, rediscovery, it almost felt like, of the great outdoors.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with two brothers in a small market town in West Sussex. And we had access to a river that ran through it and fields, and we would spend a lot of time there. My grandparents lived right on the footpath that led down to the river, so we would spend a lot of time at my grandparents'. We would spend a lot of time in the summer holidays over this river, and as I got older, we would camp overnight, and I kind of liken it to like an 80s Huckleberry Finn kind of adventure, and that happened for quite a lot of summers, and I really enjoyed that. And while I was welded to the sofa, I was kind of reminded of that by diving into the YouTube rabbit hole and seeing content creators going out camping and doing all that. And I would think, oh yeah, I used to really like that. Didn't even have a tent. We just sleep in our sleeping bags and build a big fire and cook tins of beans and all of that. And as I watched more of this kind of camping, I thought, I'd really like to do that. I didn't think it was going to help. It was just something like, oh yeah, I used to really enjoy doing that as a kid, and trying to relive some of that youth maybe. And when I finally did, much to the worry of my mum and my family, oh my God, he's going to go out and sit in the woods on his own, and is he mad? But when I did it, it was I don't know. I didn't think about epilepsy. I felt free. And I think that was the catalyst of, okay, well, I actually feel all right now. I don't feel like depressed. I don't feel sad. I'm not angry, and I kind of thought, well, maybe I need to do more of this. Is this helping? Because there are plenty of self-help books out there, but I think everybody's experience and everyone's situation is so unique to themselves, and everybody individually is so unique. I don't think you can try and treat people with this approach of, I'll read this book, it will really help you. It will help the person that wrote it probably, but it was like a unique thing that did. And I think also what happened was it was a point where everything up until that point had been horrible. And this was like the first thing that I'd done that I'd found some kind of enjoyment in.
Was there a moment, because your attempt on your life was not, as you say, there is no bottom. There was was there a trigger that made you think enough's enough? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd had this accident, got epilepsy, got depressed, decided to take my own life. Luckily, I didn't succeed. Then I spent a night in a psychiatric hospital, and I think it was that woke me up and thought, how am I lying in a room on a crash pad with a thin blue blanket when, 6 months ago I was sat in a really nice hotel with a client drinking nice wine and having a lovely dinner.
And it's literally 6 months. I mean,
6 months to a year maybe, yeah. How have I gone
such
from there?
Such a short period of time.
Yeah, and how have I ended up in a psychiatric hospital? How has that happened?
Yeah.
How have you got... So I think it was then that I decided... So there was a moment when... So basically I got sectioned after an incident with the local police and had to be put under observation. And then I had to be assessed the following morning by 3 doctors, and they would either decide whether I was well enough to go home or if I needed treatment, and then they could hold me up to 28 days. And I arrived there early hours in the morning, handcuffed, It was just such a world away from where I was to, and, this is where you're going to sleep. It was remember like the crash pads from school?
Yeah.
And there was a little pillow and
the
a
blue
thin
mats from
that's
from
exactly
school,
that. Yeah, the blue mats and a blanket, and then opposite was a big glass window with a nurse that was sat, because I'd had a history of, I had a failed suicide attempt, so I had to be observed, make sure I wasn't hurting myself. I couldn't sleep because I was just worried. Oh my God! In my own mind, I was going to be, it was like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I thought, oh, this is me now. This is it. And then the following morning, what happened was, what I didn't realise was the room that I was in was situated right next to the ward. And it was when these patients woke up in the ward in the morning that I realised that I absolutely do not want to be here. And I do not ever want to come to this place again. These hospitals do great work with people that are obviously not in complete control of themselves. They may have had some form of trauma or whatever, but they are really mentally not well and are, trying to be treated so they can be integrated back into society. And, and that must take an awful amount of patience and empathy. But that morning, when some of these patients woke up, all they wanted to do was shout and scream. And that triggered somebody else shouting and screaming. And it was just this, it it was almost like a caricature of the whole situation, if you could imagine. What do you think it's like being in a they don't call them mental hospitals anymore, but what in that kind of institution place? What do you think it's like? That's, as you imagine it, that was what it was like. It was a horrible experience. And I remember I was lucky enough to be able to go home that morning after being assessed. And in the back of my mind, I just thought, I'm never, ever coming back here again. Never. I've got to really try and do something now, because every time I thought I was getting better, something would happen and I'd fall back. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't helping myself. I was just trying to rely on others to help me all the time. And it was on the drive home from that. I'm never going back there. I'm actually going to go and try this wild camping in the woods for my own sanity, really, as strange as that sounds. And after the first night, I thought I'd unlocked the door to.
You describe it. I think there's a moment at which you're describing looking at stars, being under the stars. That's something that's just triggered a thought in my own mind.
Yeah.
Where it's that vivid sense of, and the calm almost that feeds through the narrative.
Yeah.
There's a sense of overwhelming calm and assuredness as to where you find yourself.
It sounds kind of almost very bohemian when I talk about it. But I remember laying, and I just had a little tarp over me so I could see the stars through the canopy of the trees. You know, and there was a gentle wind blowing. And I watched and I didn't just look up and see the stars. I watched I watched night come in. I watched the day leave and the night follow behind, and then the stars appeared. And then I just had this kind of thought that my problems are just insignificant in this world. The enormity of it all, you know, was it's difficult to explain. I just thought I'm so insular at the moment with everything. I'm really playing a victim here. And then when you just look out and you just think, oh, there's more. There's so much more than just me in a front room and a TV watching YouTube. So, yeah. And I think that was the catalyst to starting the journey.
Let's talk about writing the book, because I think it's often been described, writing a book often described as a journey in itself. You talk of a journey that you're on, but writing a book, as I say, a journey in itself. What do you think you've learned about yourself and in the broader sense, life in general, through the process of writing What the Ruck just happened?
Well, I think we discussed this yesterday. I didn't write it chronologically. I wrote bits here and there and then kind of stitched it together at the end.
And when you were writing those bits here and there, were you at that point where you were thinking, I'm doing this because ultimately there's a book in it, or were you just recording your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was mentioned, you know, you would bump into someone and, oh, how you been? And you'd be like, if you haven't seen them for like a year, how you been? And you're like, how long have you got? Because, you know, sit down because this is a roller coaster. And then it was mentioned, someone, oh, you should put that in a book, you know, because it's almost unbelievable to have so much happen one after the other, you know.
It's almost like I would contend, and to varying degrees, but everybody has challenges of some description through their life. But I suspect for the majority, those challenges, they come and they go, they ebb and they flow. So that's just the ebb and flow of life, the highs and the lows. It's kind of like, for you, it strikes me that everyone went, right, you can get 40 years and we'll give you all the good stuff you want, and then we're just going to give you 12 months where we're going to let you have it all and then some. Just bang, 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 bang.
It was probably a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I kind of run it through in my head, you know. I went through a horrendous divorce with my first wife, you know, sadly, you know, which I very much regret that happened. And then I was building this new life, and that was just taken away. And it was just like a systematic loss. Had an accident, got epilepsy, you know, lost my job, tried to take my own life, ended up in an institution for a night. And then, just as I was kind of discovering, I think I might be able to get all this back, you know. You know, I spent, you know, been out in the woods a couple of times, and then my wife left. I was like, what else is going to be taken from me, you know? So I've got all of this, and now I'm on my own. I've got nobody now. That's it. What am I going to do? But fortunately at that time, I think I was just mentally better in myself to be able to cope with that. I'd been doing this wild camping, and I think it was that moment when my second wife, for her own reasons, which were very valid, decided that she couldn't do it anymore and left. That was the reason that I thought, I'm going to write this book now, because I think it will give me something to do, because I'm going to be on my own for a lot of the time. And also, I think I probably need to work through some stuff in my head. I think I need to, Do you
think it gave you a purpose?
Yeah, a purpose. And I think what we're quite guilty of doing as people is something traumatic can happen to you, and you think that you've thought about it and moved on from it. But I think what we do is we can convince ourselves that we're over something and move on.
Do you think we sort of bury it and we can squash it away somewhere, but not necessarily process it or deal with it?
And I'd been doing that for a few years, thinking that I was over all of this. I'd come to terms with epilepsy, I'd come to terms with my wife leaving. And I don't think I was. And I think the book kind of forced me into rethinking some of these things, because as you write them, you think, oh yeah, that was tough. I didn't like that. Whereas before you just whatever.
There's one of the things that I love about the book is that it's the physical challenges that you undertake, and there's a whole range, running marathons and in respectfully in daft costumes, and you're pushing yourself. The fan dance, which for those that don't know is the special forces kind of yomp across the Brecon Beacons, in full kit. You're up in the Highlands of Scotland doing incredible walks, again, sometimes on your own, sometimes very ably supported by some wonderful characters in the book, which we'll come on to name check some of those. But the challenges, how do you prepare for those challenges? How do you cope with them, considering your epilepsy is still, and constantly looming large?
So, I was now on my own. So I'd kind of learned to live, or cope maybe would be the better word. Had these little kind of things, like I said earlier, sit down on the toilet, sit down in the shower, when I'm walking up the stairs, always lean a bit forward. When I'm walking down the stairs, always lean a bit back. You learn all of these kind of things.
Things that we would normally take for granted, right?
If I'm at home on my own and I use the bathroom, I always leave the door open just in case anything happens, because inevitably in a bathroom, if you have a seizure, you fall in front of the door, no one can get in. So all of these kind of you learn all these things. I wear a fall alert detector, so my mum and my brother know if I've had a fall at home, they get alerted. So we put all these things in place, and my confidence was getting better. I was feeling better in myself. I was doing these little YouTube. I was making my own YouTube videos now, going out into the woods and wild camping, and I kind of worked this routine. I discovered, not discovered, but an old friend of mine decided that he was going to keep me company on these wild camps, and he's a real character. And I'm ashamed to say that I wouldn't have associated myself with him in a previous life, because I thought, I'm not going to, do you know what I mean? And I think this new view that I had on the world and of myself, I reacquainted with a wonderful guy that would come out and help me on these wild camps. And it was then we decided, hey, why don't we go to Scotland? Why don't we walk the length of Loch Ness? Let's do that, And he was like, yeah, why not? Let's do that. And just planned it all, where we were going to camp, how we were going to get there, what we were going to eat, what happens if I have a seizure, all of these kind of things. And yeah, it was good and enjoyed it. And I think it was after that trip that I kind of thought I can do more. Yeah, definitely.
It's a wonderful insight. The book takes you beautifully on this journey of almost despair through hope, through happiness. That's how I would describe my experience as the reader. It kind of takes you down this, as I say, it is to the depths, the very depths, and then brings you back up really beautifully out the other side again. And you get that sense of the journey on which you find yourself, and supported by some wonderful characters.
Yeah.
There are some, and you I think my sense is from reading the book that you have had that support from a wonderful array of your mum, your family, your brother, Emma, your other half, your friends.
Yeah.
Great, the likes of Neil Latash, Turtle. These people have been incredibly supportive and very much part of your journey. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Neil and Turtle are very integral to the book. And I mean, Turtle really adds the comedy element of it. I mean, whilst on the outset the book might sound all doom and gloom and everything, there's some funny moments in it.
There are some very funny moments.
And he's usually at the crux of it.
And
all.
I couldn't quite determine. Actually, my first thought might have been, as I've met him, I could almost picture it.
Yeah.
But actually, had I not met him, the book's that vivid that humour really still. Yeah. You can still laugh as you're reading it. Very much so.
He's an amazing person in his own right, very unique, and he's antagonizingly annoying. A great friend, will do anything for you, all rolled into one. He's that kind of person. And I think what happened was, on that first trip to Scotland, he had hurt his ankle and couldn't carry on. And I had this moment of, do I dare do the next 2 days on my own? What would happen if anything was to happen, if I had a seizure? That was the catalyst of it all, really. And when I did do that, and I met Turtle back in Inverness 2 days later, in my mind I was thinking, well, I've done that. What is actually the worst that's going to happen? When I think about it logically, what will be the worst that happens?
Do you think that was a trigger to change perhaps that perspective that, well, I can't do that because of epilepsy, whereas, well, actually I can do anything. Yeah. The epilepsy is still going to be there, but actually, is that fair? You do. Yeah, no. I get that again as the reader. I got that sense that almost something flipped in you to say, actually, I could do that anyway, rather than I couldn't do that because of.
Yeah, it kind of was an awakening moment, really, finishing the South Loch Ness Trail, doing the last couple of days on my own. Anybody that knows me knows that if I decide to do something, I always do it like 200%. And after I'd done that, I was like, right, what's next? That was just a walk, That was a 28-mile walk, What's next? What can I do next that's a bit tougher, And then I started looking at all these other things, And it was, that was the roundabout the kind of time where I was scrolling through Facebook. I saw an advert for an event called the Fan Dance, which is part of the UK Special Forces selection process. It's a 28-kilometre yomp over the Penavin mountain and back in military kit, carrying a 40-pound rucksack, and I didn't even have to read all of the advert. I got halfway down the advert and just signed up. So I'm going to do it.
And there are many really fascinating challenges, but of those that you've undertaken, is there one that stands out for you? Is that the one that stands out for you as being the one of which you're most proud, if you like?
Yeah, I mentioned this in the book. I always finish these things slightly disappointed. I think I'm always chasing some form of elation at the end. I like the movie ending where they finish an event and people are like, oh, well done, back slaps and, and all of this kind of stuff. And I don't know whether I'm looking for that, but I always get to the end and I go, that was all right. Yeah. What's next? What to do next?
That's really interesting because I had a lady on the podcast here called Jen Drummond. So she's the first woman to have climbed the 7-second summits.
Okay.
And I was talking about a similar thing where it's kind of, so you literally get to the top of the mountain. How does that feel? And it's kind of like, eh.
Yeah.
She said, you're on top of the mountain for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. You have a look around, you breathe it in, you're kind of wowed, but you're tired. So you've got that kind of strange sense of elation and exhaustion. And then the realisation you've got to get back down again.
Yeah.
And you turn around and you kind of go, so actually what? And we talked about this sense of the moment where we're sort of seeking, and it's quite common, I think, with human nature, where we perceive the destination is where the elation, the movie moment arrives.
Yeah, yeah.
All the high fives and you've made it. Actually, what's been consistent through everybody with whom I've spoke is actually the journey. It's the one step in front of another, and that sense of absolutely being present through it is where the real reward comes. But we don't necessarily see it because we're always seeking the summit.
Yeah, no, I always feel, I would say always a little, okay, not disappointed, but okay,
it's not quite
what's next?
The high five moment you imagine it's going to be in your mind, is it?
I mean, that first, because I've done the fan dance twice now, but that first one will always stick in my mind as the moment of, because before, like, you know, a hike through Scotland was it's tiring, but it's not an endurance event, is it? And then booking onto the fan dance, having to train for that, and it was in that training that I learned myself how to probably come to terms with everything that had happened. Because I don't train listening to music, I don't run with music or anything. It was those early morning rucks in the woods before everyone would get up, because I had this routine of I have to take my medication at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I know I'm going to feel terrible for a couple of hours after that. So then what happens is, so what I would do is I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd do a 10-mile ruck around the forest, come home, take my medication, shower, change, go to bed. And I'd got into this routine, but it was those dark mornings where I would think about stuff, because that running with a 40-pound pack isn't easy. You know, running isn't easy if over a long period, you know, long distance. And so I was learning how to do all of this, and it was when my mind was telling me, please stop. You're not doing yourself any favors here. You know, legs are hurting, back's hurting, shoulders are hurting, can't breathe, lungs on fire. You know, and that internal voice that's trying to basically bring you to a stop. I would think about all those parts of my life where I'd made wrong decisions. I'd think about my children a lot, and other kind of traumatic experiences, the epilepsy diagnosis. And what I would do is I would attach that pain that I was feeling at that time to that emotion. So I was thinking of something where in a previous life I wouldn't have thought twice about, you know, whatever, you know, she'll get over it. I was now attaching a form of pain to it. And I think some people might say that's a form of self-harming, but it was therapeutic for me, because I was reliving experiences and then feeling some form of pain that was the consequence for it as well. So whether that's healthy, I don't know, but that's what, and I do it even now when I'm out training or I'm running or doing, and I want to stop, I'll think about those moments, and that's then what keeps me going.
The future. What challenges are you looking forward to next? What are your hopes and aspirations for the future?
Well, it's I mean, the strapline for, you know, the book was losing everything wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. And I found myself now at the end of something else. So the end of finishing a book and putting it out. And obviously the book culminates in, you know, running the London Marathon in military kit, boots, and a 40-pound Bergen. You know, almost the pinnacle of endurance events is the London Marathon, really. And I thought that was a great place to finish the book. And a lot of people are saying, what's next? So I've had a long period of time getting the book finished and getting that out. And I've got the fan dance again in January, which is the winter one. So again, another level of endurance on top of it. You know, if it's not difficult enough already, it's now
throw in some horrific weather conditions to contend with as well.
So there's that, and a couple of other events. And I find myself now really at a crossroads. One thing that writing the book I've discovered is I have a love for writing. The book came out of me easy.
You enjoyed the experience.
I enjoyed,
even though it's painful, clearly at times.
Yeah, it was therapeutic. It did make me think about some things, you know, that I maybe should have thought about a long time ago. I quite often, probably still do today, think that my epilepsy and everything that happened after it was like a penance for the life that I'd been leading up till then. I felt, still do feel, it's almost like it was like a punishment. And I think what it's made me do is to come to terms with trying to forgive myself. Like I said yesterday, it's not about forgiving yourself. It's about learning to live with it and then moving on. And I find that that's where I am now. I'd like to write more. Is there a second book? Maybe. I've got lots of things in the pipeline, more events. I mean, when we're talking about loss and, being repeatedly kicked in August this year, I had a seizure on holiday and lost all my hearing. And I've had to then go through the process of living with being practically deaf. But I was much better set up to cope with that through all the experiences that I'd been through before. So moving forward, I think I'm going to write more, possibly go into some form of, I wouldn't say motivational speaking, but, maybe telling my story in a more open setting, not to motivate people or to inspire people, but, just for people to think, oh, it's not just me. That's not just me that's happened to.
I was fascinated to understand as to perhaps what message you might give others who are facing adversity. Is there a message that you'd like to share with others that, as I say, people who might be facing their own struggles, be it with health, loss, life challenges in general, what would you say to them?
We often, at the beginning of these things, feel that we look about for people to help us. We want somebody to do something, take my epilepsy away or take my cancer away or but the reality is you have to do it yourself. And I am not, and I don't want people to have the impression that I'm some kind of endurance athlete that goes out and does the fan dance, runs a marathon, does all of these events, etc., etc. I don't want people to think that that's easy. Absolutely, it's not. It's it's hard.
I think I come back to the book again. It's very clear, as you read, that it's exactly that. That the events that you're undertaking are of themselves tough to overcome, tough to get through. Yes. Because to your point, respectfully, but you're not an endurance athlete. That's not why you're doing it.
No.
So there is still that sense of it's back to one foot in front of the other, one step at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like running the marathon. When you try and change your life, you're inspired. You have this epiphany. All right, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to sort things out. For the first few miles, it's easy because you're motivated. You knew. And then gradually on, it gets a bit difficult. And then as you're coming to the end, you're, like in the marathon, I was thinking, I'll get to that lamppost. And when I run to that lamppost, right, I'll run to that sign at the end of the road. And when you get to that, right, I'm going to, you tend to bite off big chunks at the beginning, but as you go further through, you have to take smaller chunks and do it. And it all doesn't happen as you want. It's about not giving up. And I know that sounds really corny, just don't let that enter your mind and be an option. Just don't give up. I would say to people running the London Marathon, you start and you finish, and in between, what you're literally doing is persuading yourself not to stop. That is essentially what that is. And I think that maybe that's the inherent in my personality, that I treat everything like a competitive sport. I don't like to lose. I set high expectations for myself, and I fall short of them all the time. And falling short of them all the time is what drives me on to do more. So I don't think it's a clear message. It's just, whatever you decide to do, don't give up. Someone more intelligent than me said, if all your dreams were going to come true, how big would you dream if you knew you were never going to fail? And I think that is the catalyst of what you need to do. Don't think big, shoot for the stars, and don't give up. And if I can get through that as I say in the book, I'm average. I'm good at lots of things, but I'm not great at anything. If I can do it, I think it's within everybody to be able to find that little that little bit of sort of hope to hold on to and just keep going with it.
Well, it's a real story of hope, adversity, inspiration is how I would describe the journey for What the Ruck Just Happened. It's a great read. Where can listeners go to buy a copy? Where should we be sending them?
It's available on Amazon, pretty much in every territory where Amazon is available. It's in paperback and hardback, and in the new year will be on Kindle and hopefully later on audiobook.
Well, Gareth de la Torre, it's been a pleasure to have you as my guest here today.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Appreciate your time. You're a genuine source of inspiration.
Thank you.
And I congratulate you on all you continue to overcome. It's a great message that you impart and share, and I really appreciate you coming on today to share it with listeners.
It's been lovely to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Cheers.
Great to have you. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.